بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم أدخل السرور على قلوب المسلمين. اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين وصل وسلم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين يا رب العالمين. Okay, we had covered this Bertrand Russell's critique, Allama Iqbal's critique of Bertrand Russell's Kantorian solution to Zeno's paradox, but we'll go through it now. Let's see if we can add something. Okay, let's do it. Okay, thus Bertrand Russell proves the reality of movement on the basis of Cantor's theory of continuity. Reality of, we looked at it, movement, motion. I think most probably he's using real here in contrast to illusion, for example. The reality of movement means the independent reality of space and the objectivity of nature. So this is not clear why. We dwelled on it a bit last time. Let's look at it again. So this is Iqbal. He thinks that if motion is real, then space should be real. There should be space, obviously. Then what does he mean by space in this specific context, and then objectivity of nature? So let's look at these two conditions, whether they are intuitively, whether they make sense to us, depending on whether it makes sense to us in the context of our current intuitions. So what Allama Iqbal is saying is movement, motion. He is using motion and movement. Synonymously, and the space must be, it is an independent reality. Independent. Okay, so it's not just real but independent space. Sorry, independent reality of space. Independent reality. And the second thing is objectivity of nature. Now, as far as I can see, independent here mean independent of matter. The space must be something separate from matter. That's what seems like for motion to be real. Because if there is only matter and by space he mean in this context, I think, room, or from what in Arabic we call al-faragh. So if there is no room, there won't be any motion if everything is stacked too closely and there's no room, there's no motion. That seems intuitively true. But why space necessarily needs to be independent of matter is not clear, because matter can itself create room. So in that sense, that room or space is dependent on matter. Um, because matter can be, in different form. It can be solid, it can be liquid, it can be gas. It can, in the form of energy as well. So in solid, there's less space. So I think intuitively his claim that there should be room for there to be motion seems plausible, seems true, but they should be independent of matter is not entirely convincing, although probably it is true. And objectivity of nature, so it again depends on what he means by objectivity, but let's say by objectivity, it's not subjective, it has independent reality independent of subjective inputs or conceptions. But here he seems to be working with a sort of a dichotomy between subjective. If we take him to mean here by objective something which is not subjective, he seems to be working with a dichotomy which is at odds with his Hegelianism. But anyhow, does motion needs nature to be objective? Not entirely clear. Not entirely clear to me, because reality can be objective. Nature can be, say, nature can be subjective, and motion, and then motion can be real. So reality of motion doesn't seem to, not sure, but at least if you think that reality, what we call nature, is there is subjective element to our conception of nature as well. There's subjective element to what we call objectivity is object plus our subject's input. So why does this, for example, nature is not entirely objective? At least the nature which we have access to. Nature is not entirely objective. Why? Would necessarily be true that motion is not real. If I'm a vat, if I'm a brain in a vat, for example, there are simulations which are depicting motions outside. That doesn't necessarily mean that that motion is not real. It's only mean that that motion is not part of reality which exists in the way which, for example, we think when we think that nature is outside us and independent of us, for example. And it's not the product of some sort of managed stimulation. It's not clear, but I think it's worth pushing this claim. But probably we can grant him the first one more persuasively, more easily. The second one can be granted with caveats. Okay. Now he comes to a critique of Russell's solution. So he said, but the identity of continuity and the infinite divisibility of space is no solution to the difficulty, for reasons we discussed last time. Because Zeno's paradoxes are like, if infinite divisibility means continuity, that doesn't solve all the problem or all the objections. It might solve the gap problem, but it won't solve the how do we go from point 1 to point 2 problem. Assuming that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the infinite multiplicity of instants in finite intervals of time and infinite multiplicity of points in a finite portion of space, the difficulty arising from divisibility remains the same. This seems true, I think, because Zeno's paradoxes, there are several paradoxes, so this might solve the problem of jumping from one point to another, but it won't solve the problem of how do we go from one point to the next if the space between those 2 points can be infinitely divisible. So it seems intuitively, and Cantor's solution is obviously not intuitive, it's mathematical. So it might still be true, but intuitively it seems that the problem of divisibility is separate from the problem of continuity, at least not entirely one-to-one correspondence there. Okay, so the mathematical conception of continuity, I don't know what it is. The mathematical conception of continuity as infinite, like I can't, I mean, I sort of know what it is, but how can we visualize it, for example? I'm not sure how to visualize it. The mathematical conception of continuity as infinite series applies not to movement regarded as an act. Now, this is something separate. So, what is motion? Here it is coming to, and I'm not sure whether this critique can be combined with his objectivity critique up when he was talking about objectivity of nature. So anyway, the mathematical conception of continuity as infinite series applies not to movement regarded as an act. Whose act? Probably the motion of objects, according to Iqbal, is because objects are not entirely objects either. They have their subjectivity. If we think of them as a self-unfolding of Geist, for example, then abstract conception of or objectification of motion actually misses the point. So my actions are my actions, and the movement related to it is different from the movement of, for example, two balls. So this is a separate critique here. It's more like Hegelian come Bergsonian critique, I guess. So the mathematical conception of continuity as infinite series applies not to movement regarded as an act of a subject or object, act of an object as self unfolding of a cosmic subjectivity, but rather to the picture of movement as viewed from outside. But there is no outside in Hegelian conception. There is only one spirit which is unfolding. So objectivity has its merits, but objectivity is abstraction after all. And so Russell's solution or control solutions are at most partial solutions because they don't see objects in the context of the self-unfolding of the cosmic spirit, for example. So the action, so there are two types of movements and they are different. So there's a motion. So when one move in space, position 1, 2, position 2 in time 1 to time 2. So that's motion. But when I as a subject think of something, hit a ball, so I'm moving as well. But my movement is different from movement of the ball because my movement is action and it is related to intention, for example. And Allama Iqbal is saying is that motion, these two conceptions of motion cannot be equated. So Cantor or Russell might account for the motion in the non-active sense, non-action sense, but they can't account for the action through their mathematical solutions and their mathematical conception of space and time. And eventually, a comprehensive conception of motion must include understanding of motion as action as well, because after all, the whole reality is a unity, is one unfolding of a cosmic spirit, for example, in this conception. Obviously, if you don't, if you live in a strict dichotomy of mind and matter, then this problem doesn't arise. But the problem is still, the problem of action is still remains as a separate problem. Right? So the act of movement, that is movement as lived and not as thought, movement lived by subject, does not have any divisibility. It's more like a holistic. Why doesn't that's a lived experience doesn't? Because if you divide it, then it doesn't remain lived. So involves abstraction, which sort of robs it of its lived character, I guess. The flight of the arrow observer, the passage in space is divisible, but its flight regarded as an act apart from its realizing space is one and incapable of partition into a multiplicity. In parting lies destruction. That's it. But the question arises whether Zeno's paradoxes were related to action, movement as action, or just movement as motion. So that would be a possible line of response to Iqbal here. But anyway, I think we were able to understand a bit much better than last time this paragraph. It's not only this paragraph, but the conceptions or concepts which are discussed in this paragraph. Okay, so we'll continue from here, inshallah. Next time we'll go to understand conceptual space. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين يا رب العالمين.